The wind blew gently, dragging dry leaves across the cracked ground of the old garden. Joaquim watched from his porch, his gaze distant, as if the scene before him were nothing more than another memory lost in time. The garden, once full of color and fragrance, had become nothing but a patch of abandoned land, where only weeds grew without permission. He let out a deep sigh. He had stopped caring about it a long time ago, just as he had stopped caring about so many other things. Loneliness had become his only companion since his wife, Laura, had passed. After that, everything lost its meaning. The days became long, repetitive, drained of color, drained of purpose. Joaquim withdrew from everyone. His friends, his neighbors, even his own children. The pain was too much, and he didn't want anyone to see the broken man he had become. He chose silence, an empty house, memories tucked away in drawers that were never opened again. That morning, as he did every day, he took his old rocking chair and sat on the porch. He wasn't expecting anything. Just time passing, as always. But this time, something different caught his attention. Right in the middle of the forgotten garden, surrounded by dry soil and dead leaves, a lone daisy had bloomed. Small, fragile, but alive. It was the only bit of color in the lifeless scenery. Joaquim frowned. How had that flower managed to grow there? Without thinking much, he stood up and walked toward it. He stared at it for a moment and, almost instinctively, bent down to pluck it. But at that exact moment, something unexpected happened. A soft voice, almost like a whisper carried by the wind, called his name. Joaquim. He froze. His heart leapt in his chest. He looked around, but there was no one there. Only the daisy, swaying gently in the breeze. Joaquim. This time, the voice was clearer. And it was coming from there. From the flower. He jumped back, a shiver running up his spine. His eyes widened. What was happening? Was he dreaming? Or worse, had he finally lost his mind? The daisy remained still, as if watching him. The wind blew again, but this time, Joaquim didn't just feel the chill of the morning. He felt something different. As if, in that fleeting instant, something inside him was about to change. And for the first time in a long while, he felt that this day would not be like all the others. Joaquim took a few more steps back, as if he needed distance to make sense of what had just happened. His eyes remained fixed on the daisy, that small flower that, somehow, had called his name. He rubbed his face with both hands, trying to wake up from a dream that felt far too real. This can't be happening, he murmured to himself. But the soft voice came again, now with a light, almost playful tone. Good morning, Joaquim. He swallowed hard. His chest rose and fell rapidly, as if he had just finished running. He looked around again, just to be sure no one was hiding nearby, playing some kind of trick on him. But the street was empty, the house remained silent, and everything looked exactly the same as it always had. Except for the flower. Who's talking? He asked hesitantly. You're looking right at me, aren't you? Joaquim held his breath. The daisy was talking to him. His instinct was to back away even more, but something stopped him. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the loneliness that had followed him for years, one that, for a brief moment, seemed to have stepped aside. He looked closer at the flower. Small, with white petals slightly yellowed at the center. Seemingly ordinary, like any other he had seen in his life. But this one wasn't like the others. This is impossible, he whispered. Impossible? Oh, Joaquim, what is impossible? He had no answer. It was obvious that flowers didn't talk. And yet, there it was, defying his logic, his reason, his skepticism. Hesitant, Joaquim crouched down slowly, as if the flower might disappear at any moment. Who, or what, are you? I'm just a daisy, she replied sweetly. But if you'd prefer a name, you can call me Mia. Joaquim blinked a few times, trying to process what he had just heard. His heart pounded in his chest. Had he finally lost his mind? Had isolation and grief pushed him past the edge? I'm not crazy, he muttered to himself, as if needing to be convinced. Of course you're not, Mia replied. You are just hearing something you never imagined you would. He took a deep breath. He could walk away, ignore this, and pretend nothing had happened. But for some reason, he couldn't. Something about that tiny flower kept him rooted to the spot. How can you talk? He asked, his voice a little steadier now. Maybe you're able to hear me because, deep down, you want to, Mia said. The words echoed in his mind. Joaquim felt a slight pang in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite name. He couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to him with such gentleness. He remained silent for a while, just staring at her, lost in his thoughts. How long have you been here? He finally asked. Long enough to know you haven't looked at this garden in a very long time. Joaquim averted his gaze, feeling a familiar weight settle over him. She was right. Mia continued, her voice calm and steady. You used to take care of this place. Your garden was beautiful, full of colors. But then, you stopped. Why? He closed his eyes for a moment. He could have just stood up and walked away. He could have ignored the question and pretended none of this was real. But for the first time in years, someone truly wanted to hear his answer. And, without knowing why, he felt like giving one. Joaquim remained silent for a while. The wind blew softly, rustling the dry leaves around him. He stared at the daisy, feeling a lump in his throat that he couldn't quite explain. Why did this flower want to know about his past? And why did he feel this strange need to answer? He sighed and, in a low voice, said, Because nothing made sense anymore. Mia stayed quiet, as if waiting for him to continue. Joaquim lowered his gaze to the dry soil and started speaking, not realizing how easily the words were coming out. This garden used to be my wife's pride. Laura would spend hours here, caring for every plant as if they were part of our family. At first, I didn't care much, I thought it was a waste of time. But she always said that flowers were like people, that they needed attention, care, love. A small, almost imperceptible smile crossed his lips as he remembered her. Over time, I started to enjoy it. I loved seeing her smile whenever a new flower bloomed. And when she left, his voice faltered. The silence stretched, but Mia didn't interrupt. She just waited, patient, as if she knew he needed this moment. Joaquim cleared his throat and continued. When she left, the garden died with her. I couldn't look at it without thinking of her. So I stopped taking care of it, stopped looking at it, stopped feeling anything at all. Mia swayed gently in the breeze before speaking again, her voice soft. But the flowers never stopped growing, Joaquim. They still try to find a way to live, even without your care. He frowned and looked around. It was true, despite the neglect, some plants still clung to life. Weak, hidden among the weeds, but they were there. Just like Mia. I didn't want anything else to grow, he admitted. I thought if I let everything die, the pain would die too. Mia let out a quiet sigh, as if she could feel the weight of his words. Did it? Joaquim swallowed hard. No, he whispered. For a moment, they just remained there, surrounded by the gentle wind and silence. Joaquim didn't understand why he was having this conversation, why his chest tightened every time Mia spoke. But somehow, her words were stirring something deep inside him. Joaquim, tell me something, Mia said after a while. Do you still dream? His eyebrows lifted slightly. Dream? Yes. Have wishes, plans, desires. Do you still allow yourself to dream? Joaquim let out a dry chuckle. That's for people who still have something to live for. Mia stayed silent for a moment, then asked in a light but meaningful tone. And what makes you think you don't? He opened his mouth to answer, but realized he didn't know what to say. For the first time in a long while, Joaquim wasn't so sure of the answers he had carried with him for years. And deep down, he felt that maybe this was the first step towards something new. Joaquim didn't answer. He just stood there, feeling the weight of Mia's question echo inside him. What made him believe he had nothing left to live for? He had convinced himself of that for so long that he had never even questioned whether it was true. The silence between them was broken by a gentle breeze that made the daisy's petals sway. Mia spoke again, but this time, her voice sounded different, almost like a whisper carried by the wind itself. Close your eyes, Joaquim. He frowned. Why? Just trust me. Joaquim hesitated. Trust, that word felt so distant from him. But, without understanding why, he obeyed. Slowly, he closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on his skin. And then, as if time had folded in on itself, he was somewhere else. The garden was full of colors. Daisies, roses, sunflowers, everything bloomed in perfect harmony. Joaquim was there, but he wasn't alone. Laura's laughter filled the air, light and musical. He saw her kneeling among the plants, her hands covered in soil, a radiant smile on her face. You can't just throw the seeds, Joaquim, she said, laughing. You have to plant them with care, with love. He saw his younger self rolling his eyes, pretending to be impatient. They're just flowers, Laura. She looked at him fondly and shook her head. They're never just flowers. They carry memories. Just like everything we love. Joaquim felt a tightness in his chest. He remembered that day. He remembered how, in the end, he had helped her, even if he grumbled about it. How, deep down, he had loved seeing the sparkle in her eyes. The scene shifted. Now, he was on the porch, watching his young children running through the garden. Laura laughed as she plucked a daisy and tucked it into their youngest daughter's hair. You look like a princess, she said, making the little girl twirl with joy. Joaquim watched from a distance, feeling warmth spread through his chest. That garden wasn't just a patch of land. It was the backdrop of the happiest moments of his life. And then, suddenly, time sped up. The flowers withered, the laughter faded, and he was alone. Laura was gone. The children grew up and drifted away. And the garden died along with it all. Joaquim's eyes flew open. He was back in the present. The dry, lifeless garden stretched before him. Mia swayed gently in the wind. What was that? His voice was hoarse. "Memories," Mia said softly. "You locked them away for so long that you almost forgot. But they're still alive inside you." Joaquim took a deep breath, trying to steady himself against the wave of emotions crashing over him. It had been so long since he had thought about those moments. He had believed that forgetting was the only way to avoid pain. But now, he realized the pain hadn't come from remembering. It had come from the emptiness he had created by trying to bury those memories. And for the first time in years, he missed that time. Not with sorrow, but with longing. Joaquim remained seated on the dry earth, feeling the breeze brush against his face. The images of the past still danced in his mind, so vivid that he could almost hear Laura's laughter and the hurried footsteps of his children playing in the garden. He looked at Mia, still struggling to believe everything that was happening. "Why did you show me that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because you needed to remember," Mia replied. "Not the pain, but the love that came before it." Joaquim ran a hand through his graying hair, taking a deep breath. He had spent so many years running from these memories that he had nearly forgotten how precious they were. But along with the longing, something else surfaced. A tightness in his chest, a weight he had carried for so long that it had become a part of him. Guilt. "My children," he murmured, more to himself than to Mia. "You miss them, don't you?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. He closed his eyes for a moment before answering. "I pushed them away. After Laura was gone, I just didn't know how to move forward. Every time I looked at them, I saw her face. It hurt too much. So I started avoiding them. The calls became rare, then stopped altogether. I shut myself away here and let time pull us apart." Mia was silent for a moment, as if giving him space to feel the weight of his own words. "And now?" she asked gently. Joaquim sighed. "Now? I think it's too late." "And who told you that?" He opened his mouth to respond but found no words. For years, he had convinced himself there was no going back. That time had erased any chance of reconciliation. But what if he was wrong? They're still out there, Joaquim. Maybe waiting for a sign from you. Maybe they miss you too. But if you never try, you'll never know. A lump formed in his throat. The thought of reaching out to his children terrified him more than he wanted to admit. What if they no longer wanted him in their lives? What if time had built a bridge too broken to cross? But then, he looked at the garden. At Mia. At the tiny flower that had insisted on growing in the middle of lifeless soil. "The flowers still try to find a way to live," he murmured, remembering Mia's words. "Exactly," she replied, a gentle smile in her voice. "And so can you." Joaquim ran a hand over his face, feeling the weight of all those years of isolation. He didn't know if he was strong enough to face the past. But for the first time in a long while, he considered the possibility. Maybe there was still time to bloom again. The sky began to change color, painted in shades of orange as the sun prepared to set. Joaquim was still there, sitting in the forgotten garden beside Mia. The weight of everything he had said lingered over him, but at the same time, he felt something different. A small spark inside his chest, as if something was awakening after lying dormant for so long. He stood up slowly, feeling his body a little lighter, as if the simple act of sharing his pain had lifted part of the burden he had carried. He walked to the porch, stepped inside the house, and stood still in the middle of the dimly lit room, the same silent space that had been his only companion for years. On the dust-covered table lay an old notebook, abandoned in the same spot where he had left it months ago. Joaquim pulled out a chair, sat down, and, with trembling fingers, opened to a blank page. He hesitated for a moment. What could he possibly say? How could he find the right words after all this time? Taking a deep breath, he pushed aside the doubt before it could paralyze him and began to write. My children. I don't know if these words will reach you, but I felt I needed to write them. For too long, I've carried a silence that became too heavy, and I think it's finally time to break it. I know I was absent. I know I hurt you by pulling away. I know that, for a long time, I buried myself in my own grief and let it push away the people who mattered most to me. What I didn't know, or maybe pretended not to know, was that loneliness doesn't heal wounds. It only makes them deeper. I lost your mother, and with her, I lost parts of myself. But now I see that by shutting down, I also lost you. And that has been my greatest pain. I know time has passed. I know I can't get back the moments I let slip away. But if there is still space for me in your lives, if there is still a chance, I want to try. I want to hear your voices again. I want to know how you are. If it's not too late, I would like to come home. With love, Dad. Joaquim set the pen down and stared at the letter for a long time. The words that had once seemed impossible to find were now there, written on the page, carrying the weight of years of silence and regret. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the dampness in his eyes. He didn't know if he would have the courage to send the letter. But deep down, he knew he had to try. Stepping out onto the porch, he looked at Mia, still swaying gently in the wind. I wrote the letter, he said, barely realizing he was speaking to a flower. Mia's voice carried a quiet smile. And how do you feel? Joaquim gazed at the horizon, where the sun was disappearing, leaving a golden trail in the sky. A little more alive. And for the first time in a long time, those words felt true. The next morning, Joaquim held the letter between his fingers. He had folded the paper carefully, as if it were something precious, and now he stared at the sealed envelope resting on the table. The thought of sending it terrified him. What if his children no longer wanted to hear from him? What if time had erased whatever bond remained between them? But then, he felt the soft breeze drifting through the open window. Outside, Mia swayed gently in the wind, silent, as if she knew this moment belonged to him alone. Joaquim closed his eyes for a moment and, before doubt could consume him, picked up the envelope, left the house, and walked to the small post office in town. He didn't look back. He didn't allow insecurity to make him retreat. He simply handed the letter to the clerk and walked away. Time passed slowly after that. The days went on as they always had, but something inside him felt different. He began to notice the little things. The wind rustling through the leaves, the sky shifting colors at dusk. Even the garden, once ignored, seemed to whisper an invitation. Hesitantly, he picked up an old trowel and knelt before the dry soil. He started by pulling out the weeds, then loosened the ground, hardened by years of neglect. It was slow work, almost like a silent conversation between him and the past. But little by little, the garden began to breathe again. Mia watched with warmth in her voice. Laura would be happy to see this. Joaquim smiled slightly, feeling something stir in his chest. I think so too. Days passed, and then, on a clear afternoon, as Joaquim returned to the porch after watering the first flowers beginning to sprout, he saw it. A letter. There, on the table, with his name written on the envelope. His heart pounded. For a moment, he hesitated. But then, with slightly trembling hands, he opened it and began to read. Asterisk Dad. We won't lie, your letter caught us by surprise. For a long time, we tried to understand your distance, we tried to reach out, but it felt like you had already erased us from your life. That hurt. A lot. But your words reached us in a way we didn't expect. We realized that just as we missed you, maybe you missed us too. And if you're willing, we'd like to try again. We'd love to visit you. With love. Your children. Asterisk. Joaquim felt his eyes well up. He read the words over and over, as if needing to be sure they were real. They still wanted him in their lives. Time hadn't erased everything. Slowly, he stepped onto the porch, breathing in the crisp afternoon air. He looked at Mia, who seemed to smile, despite having no face. They're coming to visit me, he said, his voice filled with both surprise and gratitude. Mia replied gently. Some roots are too strong to be broken, Joaquim. He let out a deep breath, as if releasing years of pain and regret. The garden wasn't fully restored yet. But now, just like him, it was beginning to bloom again. And this time, he knew he wouldn't be alone to watch the flowers grow. The day began with a gentle breeze, carrying the faint scent of damp earth. Joaquim woke up early, something he hadn't done with real purpose in a long time. He walked out to the garden and took in the progress he had made over the past few days. The soil no longer looked so dry, a few new leaves had begun to sprout, and among them, Mia remained, swaying lightly in the wind. He knelt beside the small daisy and smiled. My children are coming today. Mia seemed to glow under the morning sun. And how do you feel? Joaquim thought for a moment. He felt anxious, a little afraid, but above all, he felt hope. Alive. The hours passed slowly. He tidied up the house, swept the porch, organized a few things. He didn't want his children to walk into the same dark, empty house they once knew. He wanted them to see that something inside him had changed. By afternoon, Joaquim heard the sound of a car approaching. His heart pounded. The gates opened slowly, and then he saw them. His children. They looked different, older, more mature, but they were still the same. The same light in their eyes, the same familiar expressions he remembered. For a moment, no one knew what to say. But then, his youngest daughter stepped forward with a soft smile. Dad. That was all it took. Joaquim felt the tears come before he could stop them. They embraced, standing there in the middle of the garden, letting go of years of silence and distance. When they pulled away, his children glanced around, surprised. You started taking care of the garden again? Joaquim smiled and looked toward Mia. Let's just say I had a little push. They spent the afternoon together, talking, laughing, reminiscing. It was as if time had folded in on itself, as if life was offering him a second chance. As the sun began to set, Joaquim felt a stronger breeze pass through. Instinctively, he turned to look at Mia. But she was gone. The spot where the daisy had bloomed was empty, as if she had never been there. Joaquim felt a tightness in his chest, but not sadness. He smiled, understanding. Mia was never just a flower. She was a whisper from the past, an echo of the memories he had tried so hard to forget. She was the voice that had guided him back to life. That night, after his children left with the promise to return soon, Joaquim sat on the porch, gazing up at the starry sky. The loneliness no longer felt so heavy. The garden would bloom again. And within him, something had already been reborn. Because in the end, the people we love never truly leave us. They live on in our memories, in our gestures, in the love we plant along the way. Joaquim closed his eyes, feeling a peace he hadn't known in years. And in the gentle night breeze, almost like a whisper carried by the wind, he could still hear a sweet voice calling his name. Moral of the story: Joaquim spent years believing he was alone, trapped in his pain and regret. But in the end, he realized that love never disappears, it only waits to be found again. The people we love remain alive within us, and there is always time to rebuild bonds, seek forgiveness, and allow life to bloom once more. The past cannot be changed, but the present gives us the chance to start again. If something in your life feels dry and forgotten, remember, even the most abandoned garden can bloom again. All it needs is care, patience, and, most of all, love. And you? Is there something in your life that needs to be reclaimed? A broken bond, a buried pain, a forgiveness left unspoken? Share your story in the comments, I'd love to hear it. If this message touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who might need to hear this. And remember, there's always time to start again. Stay blessed, and see you in the next video.